Welcome, everyone, to Indications and Warnings with Chuck Farrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this edition of Indications and Warnings on December 27, 2024. It is day 1038 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Chuck, it's appropriate to wish you Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thank you, Ellen. Same to you. And we're coming out of the holidays, but we still have one to go. So don't give up hope yet, everybody.
Well, I know that our Christmas days were much more quiet than Ukraine's Christmas day. Russia unleashed one of its largest aerial assaults on Kyiv and other cities around Ukraine, missiles and drones. It was a devastating delivery of Russian terror on Christmas Day in Ukraine.
And when people listen, and when you listen to the sort of battle damage assessment of these large scale attacks, there's one thing you never hear. You never hear that Ukrainian military facilities, bases, staging areas, rail yards, you never hear that they are struck, because that isn't the target. The target is the Ukrainian people. Apartment buildings, the vaguest of military justification would be hitting a Ukrainian power plant, but that is not the largest section of their target set. It is apartment buildings. It is dense urban population centers. That's the Russian target.
And this is the Russian target in Kharkiv, in Kyiv, in Kyiv, in Dnipro City, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Russia carries out this terror war every single day and night against Ukraine with very little let up whatsoever. People want to put it into context. Remember the Blitz over London. It occurred for 57 or 58 days, and then it was over.
Yeah, so we're looking at a years-long process. And given the differential in aerial bombing in 1941 and precision strike munitions, air-launched cruise missiles now, in none of these cases with high civilian casualties, we're never looking at collateral damage. This is the deliberate targeting of these urban areas, and not as though Russia or any of us even can care anymore because we're so benumbed. But those are not legitimate military targets. Those are perforce war crimes.
Well, one would hope that this kind of continuing assault by Russia, the war crimes they do commit every single day in their genocidal invasion of Ukraine, you would hope finally that NATO, the European Union, the United States, other allies around the world finally get the message and wake up to what Russia is doing. As, for example, our newest NATO member, Finland, woke up to the Russian threat in the Baltic and took action.
Yes, the latest of the anchor follies in the Baltic Sea, a vessel called the Eagle S, was involved in another of these preposterous anchor dragging incidents that sever undersea infrastructure. Every nautical chart is marked with it's and if you ever get a nautical chart, it's actually hard to get them online because they are themselves so valuable. There's a wavy purple line, two of them, like a little fence with wavy purple lines. And it will say repeatedly every, 10 nautical miles on your chart, do not anchor here. Do not drag anchor. So these are deliberate attacks. This is obviously gray zone operations by the Russians. The interesting thing was, as somewhat wiser than me always says, the means is the message. Well, the Finns sent SEAL Team 6 to board that ship. And it was not what the Swedes did. Hey, stop with a pilot boat. Could we talk to you? This was an absolute full-on pre-dawn assault, and they took the ship.
That's exactly the way to do it. This, you're not talking about a couple of Zodiacs coming alongside. You're talking about a full-scale operation, how do you occupy, board and take over a ship of this size?
Well, it's a really complex operation. It generally has both an aerial assault component and a boat component. I won't go into this, but there are certain ways that you can approach the ship, taking advantage of its own naval architecture. It has blind spots in its sensors. And the real skill to it is that you have to do it quickly. And in order to do it quickly, you've got to do it often. At least one of the things that has to be done by an oncoming commando team, imagine climbing a caving ladder that's about this wide. It's two cables with these metal rungs in them, maybe 100 feet of that. And you've got to climb 40, 50, 60 feet up that ladder over the railing and onto the ship. Now, some of the people are coming in by helicopter and fast rope, but all of this stuff has to come together at once. And it's not only spectacular, it's spectacularly difficult, and you're doing it in absolute pitch darkness with no lights whatsoever, just NVGs. No question that the Finns are terrifically good at this. Their special operations forces are as good as anyone's in the world.
And they're in NATO.
They're in NATO.
The right place for them to be. Now, it's been reported that this ship, the Eagle S, was filled with espionage equipment, kind of an unusual cargo, unless, of course, you're working for the Russians.
Exactly. We're looking at a series of these events now. Of course, we had in 2022, we had the Nord Stream pipeline, which was, classic underwater demolition. And then in October 2023, there was a ship called the New Polar Bear, so you don't confuse it with a new polar bear. She drug anchor as well across the Baltic Connector and a natural gas pipeline. There was this fig leaf that Russia was hiding behind, and a little bit of the incredulous, dare I say, underinformed Western media that this was somehow just bad seamanship. You don't drag an anchor for 100 miles. That isn't bad seamanship. That is insane. And in the latest case, Eagle S was actually altering her course, literally plowing the seabed to make sure that she snagged something. And I think Finland has finally done the right thing. Every other suspect vessel has been boarded, spoken to, and turned loose. So hopefully the Eagle S will have a little bit more time to consider their poor seamanship, hopefully riding at anchor in a Finnish port.
Well, because of Finland's and Sweden's new membership in NATO, the Baltic is essentially now a NATO lake. It could easily be closed to any Russian vessel. In fact, Russia itself denied navigation in the Black Sea until Ukraine freed the Western Black Sea. Is there any reason you can think of that the NATO member nations around the Baltic shouldn't deny Russian vessels navigation across the Baltic?
Of course, the 800-pound gorilla among the navies of the world and NATO is, of course, the United States Navy. Freedom of navigation is something that is baked into the revolutionary gene, the genetics of the United States, because as we were a young nation, it was the Royal Navy that prohibited the United States from conducting trade with the world. So that being said, a blanket denial of Russian commerce in the Black Sea, that probably isn't going to happen. But that does not mean that every Russian vessel coming or going through the Black Sea would not be boarded and allowed a pilot to come on board to make sure that their navigation is in order as they transit these things. And that definitely could happen.
And at the same time, I would think the pilot or the inspector, we can call him or her, would want to investigate the cargo, at least see a manifest, even knowing, of course, it would be a fake Russian manifest, but still.
Yeah, that's what I definitely see in the cards. I don't know why it hasn't been happened so far, because now we're coming up on 5 incidents of this interference with underwater infrastructure. It might actually be that you can permit the freedom of navigation to vessels trading with Russia, but you would force them to convoy. So for their own safety, of course, and wait till there are 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe 70 ships that could all be released together. And they would probably arrive at Russian ports, I would say, at least every 3 months, Alan.
I think that
And
is a great idea, Chuck.
thank you. That's the naval staff officer. I come up with some sick ideas sometimes, yes.
About 40% of Russian crude oil that's exported to the world goes through the Baltic. I think all those Russian oil tankers should be stopped and inspected. It takes a while to do an inspection of an oil tanker, days and days and days.
One of the things I think that is happening, one of these looming headlines, and it is going to be an ecological disaster precipitated by a Russian shadow fleet tanker. I think that's coming. These ships tend to be these ghost ships. They pass through many owners, shell corporations, flags of convenience, sailing with mariners that are their services are for sale at a discount. It's inevitable that this is going to happen. And, were I not consulting the crystal ball, we had 3 Russian tankers come to grief in the Sea of Azov, which is by no means the open ocean,
No.
right? And they broke in half, which is what these ships could do. And again, that could happen in the Baltic. It could happen in the English Channel. It could happen in the Red Sea. Look, this can happen anywhere. It's likely to happen.
Yeah, and it's happening again in the Bosporus right now. I think a Russian tanker is disabled in the Bosporus. But those ships that sunk in around Crimea, they were almost 20 years old, and they were not ocean-going tankers. But the Sea of Azov, as you say, it's more a lake than the North Atlantic.
Yeah, and even look, the Edmund Fitzgerald came to grief in a lake.
Yeah.
So, but there is also the quality of ship, right? A 20-year-old vessel should still sort of be in her prime, I would think. But, when you are a ship built in the workers' paradise of wherever, Kazakhstan, and who knows? The best ships the Russians had, coincidentally, were built by the Ukrainians.
That's right, right in Mykolaiv. Which is one reason why the Russians wanted to get to Odessa and get to Mykolaiv, because Mykolaiv is and will remain an important shipbuilding center for Ukraine. I don't understand, Chuck, how Russia has the temerity to send ships across the Baltic and in the most obvious way, dragging anchors, destroy these internet and electric cables, and they think they can get away with it.
Well, what's unfortunate is they were getting away with it. I'm not going to name names. Jake Sullivan. Whatever people think of Ronald Reagan, what would he have done? This wouldn't have happened 5 times. It wouldn't have happened. And there is, and again, this has become a NATO lake. So whether or not we're going to curtail Russian freedom of navigation, let's take that off the table. But convoying their vessels for safety, inspecting them all at frigate point, these are things that can happen. There's another thing that happens when you're doing a ship takedown. When I was a SEAL, we'd seize the vessel, but by the time the sun came up, there were 2 or 3 destroyers right there. They had come out of the mist. That was the good thing about the U.S. Navy. We almost never did anything alone. There were the pointy end was close by.
Well, of course, there are Russian warships on patrol in the Baltic. I guess they are not only based out of St. Petersburg, but also out of Kaliningrad. So they're not that far from Finnish waters. They're not that far from the impounded Eagle S. I guess you would expect Russia to send at least a speedboat across the Baltic to see what's up.
Or there there are some of these vessels are getting a little long in the tooth, but their descendants are pretty capable. Russia knew a long time ago it wasn't going to go blue water Navy up against the Royal Navy and the United States Navy and NATO nations in their own spheres of competence. For example, the Spanish have a credible Navy, the Dutch, the Germans.
The Italians do too.
The Italian Navy is quite good. So they came up with a whole series of missile corvettes, and these are high speed, basically unarmored, but they fire anti-ship missiles. Pretty capable vessel, definitely something that could sink a merchant ship, but I wouldn't take it up against an Arleigh Burke destroyer. It's just, that ain't going to happen. Or a carrier battle group, that ain't going to happen either. But it's time to take some, I don't even want to say punitive, but let's say administrative measures against Russian commerce in the Black Sea. You don't get to do this, right? You don't get to do it.
Yeah, the Baltic, Chuck.
Yes, yeah.
The Baltic.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Freudian slip.
But whether you're talking about the Baltic or whether you're talking about the Black Sea, where the oil spills have occurred, the real problem, as I see it, is Russia commits these acts, whether it's running the environmental risk of running ancient oil tankers around the world, or intentionally cutting communication, electric, and internet cables on the seabed of the Baltic. They do it, and then the world looks away. In a few weeks, it's forgotten. This is really what has to stop happening.
Yeah, and this is on the media, and who the media works for. My quasi-libertarian feelings on this. The media works for the power, right? For example, you never hear of the ecological disaster that was Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. You never hear that was one of the largest single releases of hydrocarbons in the history of the Earth. You never hear about that. That it was very plausibly the largest ecological disaster ever to hit the Baltic Sea in geologic history. We don't talk about that. We try to say that it was 3 Ukrainians who rented a 50-foot sailing boat. That's still going around. Where is Greenpeace, right? Where is Greta? This was a deliberate act of ecological sabotage. And that's why I don't put it past who benefits from chaos. Who would benefit from another supertanker breaking in half in the Baltic? Whose fishing is going to be affected? Right? Danish, right? Swedish.
You use the key word, chaos. People forget, and they need to be reminded often, that Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, Nicaragua, I'm naming countries all with dictators in charge, by the way. Dictators generally do benefit from chaos. They seek it, they create it, and they exploit it. So people need to remember that word that Chuck used, chaos, that's the key word. Russia benefits from chaos in so many ways.
And it was a pillar of Iranian foreign policy from the Persian Gulf to the Levant, which is, of course, the eastern portion of the Mediterranean. They wanted that under Iranian control, but failing total consolidation by Iran, wrote lots of papers on this. Their geopolitical goal was intermediate state chaos. If we can't have it, no one can have it. No one gets mail, no one gets TV, no one gets electricity, no one gets nothing. Not personal safety, nothing. And it worked for Iran for what, 45 years?
Yeah. Another key phrase from Chuck, this is real wisdom. If we can't have it, no one can have it. Now, that is essentially what Russia aims to do in Ukraine. And we're going to get to some maps later on in this show. But first, we're going to take a stop at more chaos in the skies over Grozny, where Russian air defense, active, shot down or at least disabled this Azerbaijani civilian flight that was en route from Baku to Grozny and didn't land in Grozny.
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, there was a Ukrainian airliner flying out of Tehran. And as it departed, it was locked onto by an Iranian Russian manufactured air defense system and shot out of the sky. And that resonated in Canada because many of the citizens on board were Canadian Ukrainians. In fact, dozens of them, maybe 50 or so. We've apparently got a similar situation here with an outbound airliner flying what from, and I'm just speculating here, but very likely a dual use airfield facility. You see them a lot in the United States, believe it or not. On one side, there's an Air National Guard terminal. On the other side, there's a civilian terminal. Looking at the damage to this airliner, and there's a lot of things that can happen when an airliner is downed and there's a big tail section sitting there. In the United States, almost immediately with the firemen arrives a crew to put canvas over the livery of the airliner, right? They don't want American Airliner or Delta or anything showing. In this case, there was a decision, likely by whomever was there. They didn't do any concealment of the livery, and you can clearly see scores of perforation in the rudder, which is the upright fin, and the stabilizers, which are the horizontal appendages sticking out from the rear fuselage. There's no question in my military mind that this aircraft was hit by anti-aircraft. I don't know if it was hit by a missile or if it was hit by autocannon. However, most, not all of them, but the vast majority of sophisticated surface-to-air missiles, they are proximity fused. So as long as the missile is closing on the target, it will go to hit to kill. As soon as it veers off, as soon as the missile calculates, I'm not getting any closer, it goes off. So the rear of this aircraft is peppered with these holes. The awful drama about this was you have an airliner flying along, and airliners aren't built like B-17s or B-52s. They don't have the redundancy in hydraulics and electronics and even manual flight controls. They don't have the triple and double systems. So this aircraft was disabled. Her flight controls were utterly out of control. We can talk about how we know this. She declared an emergency. And then the Russians began to divert this aircraft. They declare Mayday, and they're looking for the nearest airbase. They're struggling to control the airfield.
And that nearest airbase was in Grozny, and they were denied emergency landing.
Exactly. Now, this may be in the least cynical, vicious, and obscene interpretation that they didn't want a crashed airliner on an active military runway. If that makes you feel good, then good on you. But they diverted it a second time, and then they diverted her a third time across the Caspian Sea, which in my uncharitable mind really seems like they were hoping this stricken aircraft would crash in the Caspian Sea. She didn't. Again, I don't know who these two pilots are, but they fought to save this airplane and their passengers till the absolute very end. There is a video of this plane coming in to its final resting spot. Her gear's down. Interestingly, her flaps are not down all the way. This is telling me the flight controls aren't. She's what they call an unstabilized approach. So she's not on glide path. She's not even, in landing configuration, but they were able to belly land this thing. It was amazing. But yeah, those passengers on board know what happened. The flight crew knows what happened, and the world is eventually going to know what happened.
Eventually, there are investigations underway. Predictably, the Russians have said no comment because it's inappropriate to make a comment before investigations are carried out. but I don't think a comment from Peskov would serve anyone's purpose. I saw a map of this airliner's journey across the Caspian Sea, and it just looks so frightening. From altitude to sea level. Obviously, the pilots fighting to control the plane's forward motion. They really do deserve a lot of credit.
Absolutely. There are times and certain flight configurations, they had most of their rudder blown up. So they weren't able to turn the aircraft. So there are different flight configurations where you can actually use the engines and the torque of the engines to bring you up or bring you down. They did everything humanly possible. But my big takeaway was the Kremlin wanted to make sure that this airliner went into the Caspian Sea. And, that's just obscene. Okay, that's so Russian, dare I say. And Alan, you and I are old enough to remember some of the dozen or so airliners that were shot down by the Soviet Union. Deliberately. Korean airliners, Swedish airliners, anyone with a navigation problem, they ate a missile.
Yeah. Inexplicable, inexplicable, but you really do have to call those two pilots heroes. And I don't know what will come of it, of course. Azerbaijan and Russia are not on the best of terms, and I think they'll be on worse terms now.
I think that had one of the reasons to do with no canvas over the flight services. This was Azerbaijan letting the world know what they think happened to this aircraft.
Well, that's one way to get to know Russia is to watch how they treat the rest of the world and watch their espionage and the destruction that they commit in so many different ways in so many places around the world, expecting the world to look away, to take no notice. And unfortunately, that is what the world does most often when there's an incident involving Russia. I get the feeling in a way that the world is not as focused on Ukraine today, day 1038 of Russia's genocidal invasion. It's not as focused on Ukraine as it should be. We're going to try to bring some focus by taking a look at what is happening in Kurakova right now. That is the one map we're going to focus on in this show. The situation in Kurakova is really degrading almost hour by hour at this point.
Yeah, there isn't much good news here, but we'll take a close up look at the map. We bring you the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you're looking at this map now, and Thomas, our producer, will put this up for you. It's the 1950 Boxing Day map, 26 December. Kirkova is up in the right-hand corner. The Institute for the Study of War put out a report, and I never blame anyone for erroneous reporting, because you're trying to deal with the information that comes out of a battlefield. It's like being in a thunderstorm and trying to know what's happening. The town of Kurakove may or may not be under Russian occupation. I would say at the very least that it is under great pressure and at risk of being surrounded. At the top of the map, the highway, the H-15 highway, is the major east-west artery, basically an interstate highway. To the west of Kurakova, the Russians have reached it in two locations, one northwest of Velika Novosilka. They are actually to the highway. And then there's the TO-518, which heads down into Velika Novosilka. And that highway, the Russians are almost to the junction there as well. If I had to guess, the two Russian pincers that can close to the west of Kurakova they may or may not be able to do that. You can see a multi-channeled water course to the west of Kurakova. That's going to make it tough for the Russians to get together. But as often as you hear Alan and I poo-pooing Russian tactics, they may have listened, and somebody wrote a paper at the War College listening to indications and warnings, because they are finally taking a city by converging to the west of it. That is what they are trying to do. Ukraine has fought a valiant effort here to the south of Kurakova. I don't know if we can call that a holding effort yet. It hasn't succeeded. At the very least, we'll probably, in 2 weeks, we'll call this either what it was, a holding effort or a fighting withdrawal. But that terrain, in my estimation, to the west of Kurakove, you might as well let it go.
Not an easy battle map for the Ukrainians to withdraw easily from. And as you've often mentioned, Chuck, withdrawal is actually the most difficult military maneuver that anyone is going to face on the battlefield. But I think the other thing that complicates this, frankly, is up in Pokrovsk and during the withdrawal from Avdiivka. This is where Russians increasingly shot in cold blood Ukrainian soldiers who had become prisoners of war. And that comes to my mind simply because we will see another Ukrainian withdrawal here around Kurakova, around Velika Novosilka, quite possibly. And there is increased danger now to every single Ukrainian soldier involved in a withdrawal, not the expected danger of being on the battlefield and doing your job as a soldier, but the unexpected and unnecessary danger of falling into the hands of Russians who are going to commit a war crime and just kill you.
Yeah. That is a sword that cuts both ways. There is no better way to galvanize your opponent than to have him or her convinced that if they surrender, they'll be shot out of hand. Therefore, fight to the death. So imagine that fight to the death mentality is inculcated into the Ukrainian troops. Now let's think about the groups of 150 Russian soldiers surrendering at one time into Kursk, in the Kursk area, right? Because the opposite has been done. The desire to surrender has been interjected into the Russian forces, convincing them with leaflets and testimonials from captured soldiers that I'm being treated fairly. I've gotten medical care. I'm getting food. I'm getting clothing. That's what you want to do. So, there's another thing. And as people, I'm sure Thomas has the map up. And if you can, take a screen grab so you can zoom in on this. Remember, in this war, everything is moving on those thin green lines, the vegetative breaks that circumscribe the agricultural fields. That's where people advance. That's where the logistics move. That's how the infiltration routes go. And every time you are cutting across an open space, we have seen the Russians are generally losing between 20 and 80 and sometimes 100% of their assault forces. Every time they roll the bones, even in a small tactical effort, and even on some larger ones, for example, around Kupiansk, where they lost 900 guys in 21 minutes, right? That's why their casualties are approaching 800,000. And again, I don't want to name names, Mike Johnson, this is exactly what we predicted, Alan, exactly a year ago, almost to the day. We said, this is going to lead to widespread Russian advances, and it has.
It has. Russia was advancing at a pretty steady clip in the month of November. But here in the month of December, the Russian advance is 40% less than it was just last month in November. So the way the Ukrainians have chosen their defensive positions, the way they are fighting on the defensive, has slowed the Russian advance down.
Yes, absolutely. And there's things we always talk about. I want people to bear in mind because you don't hear this on big media. Russia is achieving these gains at incredible, unsustainable loss rates. They've almost lost 10,000 tanks. They've almost lost more tanks that every NATO country has, barring the United States. And it's one thing to take an objective by these grinding, costly, and again, I don't call them meat wave attacks because they're not even choreographed to that point. They don't even get like 3,000 guys in a line and charge. It's this ridiculous daylight bumper to bumper attack. It's one thing to take an objective. It's another thing to hold it. And not only are these attacks so costly for the Russians, it costs so much to hold, consolidate, and hold what they have. So, for example, an infantryman in combat could easily go through 2,000 rounds a day. More. You could go through 5,000 rounds a day. It depends on where you are. So imagine I've got to supply 1,000 rounds and 5,000 calories to my soldiers every day. Coming across those open fields on these constricted ground lines of communication, you're going to be lucky if you get 20 bullets, and you're going to be lucky if you get 200 calories. You see how that's going? Your hopes for a new pair of boots? I don't see that happening. So again, we'll have to see. This is winter. The gains are costly, and holding is costly as well.
I'm sure Ukraine has mined all this open space between Velika Novosilka and Kurakova. It's not going to be easy for the Russians to advance across this open space or to claim it as newly occupied parts of Ukraine.
Right. The mine density here is greater than probably any place on Earth, including Cambodia and other places that were mined in such density. You only need to look at the videos, the overhead videos of Russian attacks, and you see that no vehicle is able to deviate from the mine plow track. They don't get 5, 10, 15 meters before they're blown up. That's how dense the minefields are. What you don't see is those mines are not delivered by the mine ferry every night. Those are patrols that go out on their belly, crawling up through minefields. And again, the Russians just scatter them willy and nilly. You're going out at night, you got a minefield map, I've got a red lens flashlight, I'm crawling on my belly with a plastic knife. I'm sticking it in. And I say plastic knives. We had these knives that were made out of thermoplastic. Yeah. They could cut paper. They were razor sharp, but they were made of a high density plastic. So some of the mines you see the Russians coming to grief on, they're their own because they don't know where their mines are. They don't know. And that's karmic. And I like that. That's good.
I like that too. And the reason you want a plastic knife in a minefield is that you don't want a lot of metal on you in a minefield.
No, you don't want any ferrous metal. And one of the newer Ukrainian inventions is to fly in with a Baba Yaga, land it. You put a claymore by the side of the road, and it is not fused with a percussive or an electric blasting cap. It is fused with a magnetic influence device, which could be put together at Radio Shack. But as a Volkswagen goes by, it's not interested in a Volkswagen. If an APC goes by, maybe it's not interested in that. But when a main battle tank goes by with their different magnetic fields, wham. Good stuff.
Now, this might sound like a very simplistic thing for me to say, Chuck, but while Velika Novosilka, Kurakova are important to Ukrainian defense, and they are, they're not Pokrovsk. The Russians have yet to occupy even a neighborhood of Pokrovsk, to the best of my knowledge.
That is the major objective. All of these battlefields that we're talking about now, Velika Novosilka, Kurakove, Pokrovsk, these are all the sort of latest and fruits of the Avdiivka. Once Avdiivka fell, and it took about 11 or 12 years for Avdiivka to fall, and this was a Ukrainian miscalculation. They made no effort to in place defense in depth. Now, I'm not blaming the local general. Is it non-optimal generalship? Absolutely. But there is a question of resources, time, manpower, bulldozers, backhoes, being able to move your engineering forces around in your rear area, which is a consequence of not having mobile air defense, which is a consequence of the shortage of air defense and the constant threat to Ukrainian cities. So I'm not, I very rarely will criticize a Ukrainian general who are constantly facing a question of resources and objectives, and that's why you get to be a general, frankly, or an admiral.
That's your job.
It's your job.
You have to make those tough choices. This is going to be a pretty quick show today, Chuck. I think probably a lot of our viewers will be pleased to hear that. But we will be back with some additional maps, and we will be back before New Year's Eve to do that. But the very last topic I want to touch on, because every single day we're coming closer and closer to January 20th, which is Inauguration Day. That is when President-elect Trump will take the oath of office. And so there is some increasing talk about peace negotiations, what they'll look at. Trump himself has made some comments about decisions that the Biden administration finally made, which was to give Ukraine permission to use ATACMS, other Western supplied missiles, Storm Shadows and Scalps, on targets inside Russia. Now, Trump has said he believes that is unwise. I want to remind viewers, ATACMS, not a long-range missile.
It's an artillery system and a deep strike one. But again, it's important for us to, you're going to be at dinner parties and cocktail parties here over the holidays. Please remind your pro-Russian interlocutors that it is not American weapons that are being used in long-range strikes against Russian targets. They are Ukrainian weapons. We have provided the Ukrainians with no weapon systems that could possibly hit Moscow or 700 kilometers north of Moscow. We have never given them those weapons. Remind those people you're talking about, the cocktail parties, that we have not given F-16s to Ukraine. Everyone else has. And ask them how many Ukrainian pilots are being trained in the United States, and look down in their martini and say, those olives represent both of the pilots that are training in the US. So there is so much that the previous commander-in-chief, I didn't say a name, could have done, but did not do. And I guess I can blame it on the national security apparatus, Alan, and that's all I can say.
Well, I blame it on the commander-in-chief, frankly. I've come to that conclusion. I hate to have to do that, but that's my conclusion. Look, there is a 190-mile range ATACMS that the United States has in its arsenal. That is not the version that was provided to Ukraine. And as you say, Chuck, it's really Ukraine with Ukrainian-made drones primarily that has taken the war deep inside Russia to oil refineries, to fuel depots, also to high-level command posts deep inside Russia. It is what I have called a pinprick war, but eventually those pinpricks, especially in the oil refineries, are going to create a hole in the fabric of the Russian energy industry first, And that hole is going to cause a rip in Russian society.
Absolutely. And we hear of these long range strikes. It is in Moscow's interest to conflate those long range strikes with American weapons. They want you to form that conclusion in your mind. When actually what I'd like you to consider is this: the elegance of the intelligence that is available to Ukraine, targeting almost 1,000 miles inside Russia, pinprick strikes on certain apartment buildings in 20-story buildings. That isn't a coincidence. Now, I don't know what that target was, but the Russians sure do, because they hit it twice. And one other thing, one of the most capable long-range strike platforms that Ukraine has is a kit airplane that you and your dad might build in a hangar in Fresno, the Foxbat. And it hits that seam in air defense. It isn't fast enough. It isn't high enough. It's right in that Goldilocks spot, and it gets to the target.
Ukraine is undertaking its own long-range ballistic missile program. It's been in development. It has moved into production. President Zelensky has said that Ukrainian long-range ballistic missiles will be used in 2025. And, if the Ukrainians find a way to design something, produce something, test it, it's going to be good. Ukraine is on the verge, maybe on the verge, of not needing long-range American missiles, none of which have been provided to Ukraine anyway. So that was the incentive for Ukraine to develop its own program.
And well, it should. And again, remind everyone, because we say this all the time, Ukraine was the brains of the Soviet Union. Their ships, their aircraft, their aerospace, their spacefaring capabilities, their rocket engines, their solid rocket engines, all of that is the fruit of Ukrainian genius. All of it is. And we just saw with the recent use of Russia says a brand new weapon, which we saw the multiple reentry vehicles striking the Ukrainian city, that was cobbled together out of spare parts lying around in some Russian rocket depot. And congratulations to the Russians, because out of the last 15 times they've tried to fire ballistic missiles, 10 of them have gone sideways. So congratulations to those Russian scientists. And what we're talking about with Ukraine's new Grom-2 missile, we're talking about a missile in itself that will have multiple independent warhead capability. And again, these are conventionally armed weapons, but their ability to strike will be measured in the thousands of miles, which is still a short range / intermediate range ballistic missile.
Exactly like the one that the Russians fired against Dnipro City. And just one final comment, and I imagine we will get to the south bank of the Dnipro River in the next show. For at least 3 weeks now, there have been reports of Russians assembling forces and equipment it needs to cross the Dnipro River and undertake another assault of Kherson on the north bank. It hasn't happened yet, and they have some real problems with making it happen, don't they?
Well, I'm sure that it came down from the Kremlin. We want to cross the Dnipro assault. Notice I said assault. We want you to take action across the Dnipro. And it would take the greatest temerity and even bravery for a Russian general to say, what do you mean, assault? How long am I supposed to be there? How am I going to get ammunition across? What do you want, a bonsai charge across the river? I encourage the Russians to embark on this folly as soon as possible. They've said there's 10,000 people and 3,000 speedboats. What I don't hear are landing craft, pontoon bridges, air superiority. I don't hear any of the things that make crossing a major river possible. Again, I encourage the Russians, please go forward with this, get as many people on the North Bank as you possibly can, and then see what happens. And it is not going to be good.
I'm sure we'll take a look at what's happening up in Kherson on the next show. Chuck, am I missing any topics that you wanted to cover today?
I think we'll keep an eye on Kherson. I'd like to underscore that we are seeing precisely what, and I don't want to take credit for predicting anything. This is Mike Johnson's finest hour. The fall of Kharkov, the fall of Velika Novosilka, the major Russian advance from Avdiivka to, but not into, Pokrovsk. These are laid at his feet, no one else's. And unfortunately, we both predicted this. Yes. And it was just about a year ago.
It was a year ago at Christmas time that Mike Johnson refused the additional Ukrainian appropriation bill. It was eventually, I guess, it eventually found its way through Congress. But it's because of that delay. And it's also because of the delay of the Biden administration itself in actually supplying everything that they promised, that all of 2024 for Ukraine has been a mighty defensive battle, period. It's Ukraine on defense, and with no timeouts, by the way. It's just Ukraine on defense on every single play for 2024. And that is setting aside the Kursk incursion, a brilliant little sideshow in a way, something of a sideshow. But that's it.
Yeah, that is Ukraine's blue chip. And incredulously, Alan informed me just before the show that there was some creature in the incoming administration who floated the balloon that maybe Ukraine should withdraw from Kursk. I agree. That is a great idea, and there's no way that this gesture would be lost on Putin. He would see it for what it is, a gesture towards peace and harmony. You don't give a bully your lunch money. He's not going to say, "Hey, I'm seeing the light." It's vital that Ukraine hold on to that piece of territory, both for the diversion that it causes and the complications into Russian logistics and battle priorities. For every reason, they need to hold on to it. And as a countermeasure, there's going to be negotiations eventually, and I hope they are years away, but eventually there will be. And the status of Kursk should be a Ukrainian hold card.
Absolutely. And we all know you give a bully your lunch money, next week he's coming for your allowance.
You got it. I wish we were wrong, Alan, 3 years ago, but apparently.
Yeah. What the other thing that we are going to talk about and devote more time to is the total robotic assault that Ukrainian forces used up in the little town of Lipsky. We are going to talk about that because it is a wholly new development, but it really deserves more time than we can devote to it today. So Chuck and I are going to be back. We're actually going to do some pretty hard work between now and New Year's Eve and come back with a 6 or 7 hour long show for everyone.
Well, we do have a slide deck on remotely piloted unmanned ground vehicles for Ukraine. We've been following their development over the last, 18 months. So we've got a whole slide deck on that. So we'll keep you filled in on that as well.
With that, Chuck and I are going to conclude this edition of Indications and Warnings. It's day 1038 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. People also need to be reminded right now. This is a 10-year-long war. It has only focused the world's attention in the last 1,038 days. And that's why every time I'm with Chuck, we come to the end of indications and warnings. I am so proud to be able to say, Slava Ukraini.
And Heroim Slava, glory to the heroes. We'll be back soon, guys. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Chuck.